Lord, for the honour of being called by our fellow citizens to this office of honour and trust. Give us grace, diligently and honourably, free from private interest or prejudice, to discharge the duties entrusted to us, to the common good and in your sight, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Please have a seat. So I don't think we have any apologies this evening. Do we have any declarations of interest? I move to confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting. Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Miles. Councillor Williams.
I do that, Mr Mayor, with some corrections and some comments. I take council to page 4, and it relates to 349/18. There's an erroneous 2 in there and a full stop. But more importantly, that was passed unanimously, and I think the minutes need to reflect that. If you look in the runtime for the videotape, 58.34, councillors voted unanimously for it, and I think that needs to be reflected in the motion, in the result of the vote.
Thank you.
Moves us on to page 9, down the bottom, 361/18. Again, an erroneous aspect in those minutes where it's got typed text here.
Thank you.
Now, more importantly, I'll get to the issues arising out of the minutes, particularly the questions with or without notice, and I refer council to page 11, 13.3. It relates to a street tree planting in the corner of Market and Mary Street. There has always been a tree in that location, and the tree was only taken out as a result of disease in the tree. If you look at the other corners of the intersection, you will find there's trees in the same location. So I don't accept that it is a hazard or would be a hazard. I think that I'd be interested to know what those complaints were that reportedly about the tree that was there previously. But I can assure you, and I'll get the residents to write to council if necessary in that block of flats, that they want a tree in that location or in a location that's suitable. So I just add that additional information into that question. More importantly, or not equally importantly, I'll bring you to 13.4, which is the encroachment on the council's reserve down at Riverglade. And I recall that we got a similar response last time that was raised by me, and I think it's totally inadequate. If you look at that map, if you look at the hatching on that map, that shows the extent of encroachment. And you can also see a trampoline in there, and I walked past there this morning, and there's leisure furniture where people have been sitting. I think council needs to very clearly reclaim that site, to fence it, and to advise those residents that it's not for their use. We've had examples recently where council's lost control of public lands by its inaction in terms of making claim, or not inaction, but by default, council needs to make claim on the land it manages and organises, and in this case, it's a significant encroachment into a significant piece of bushland. So I would urge council to rectify that situation and make it very clear as to its intent of rehabilitating that area and
demarcating. Could we have those hatched drawings you have?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Is it just the one that?
I've only got one copy.
Okay.
Pretty poor copy. It illustrates the extent.
So the hatched area is where the encroachment is. Is
yes,
that correct?
That's right.
Thank you.
Quite happy for the staff member to verify it, but it's not trivial. So with those comments and with those amendments or corrections, I'm happy for the motion be put.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Crusser?
I'd just like to make a comment if I could. Mr.
Please.
Mayor. Firstly, I'm just reading through this. I just think it's great as a small council that our bushland team are forming relationships with those owners of those properties and encouraging them to support us as we take care of those areas. As a small council, those relationships are really important. So I'd commend the bushland team on that. I'd also just like to commend the IT team and Minute Taker because I know this is a new system and we're all learning it. And I really commend you for your patience and efforts, and I think you're doing a fabulous job. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Costello. Noted. Are there any further questions or comments? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. I move to item 2.1.
Move the motion.
Moved Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. It's a message of condolence for the late Mr. Collins, and I'd like to read at least some of it. Late John Gary Collins passed away on Wednesday, the 7th of November 2018, following a struggle with cancer. John and his wife Sue have lived at Collingwood in Woolwich for over 50 years. They would have been married for 56 years on November the 24th this year. John served the community as the Hunters Hill Alderman from 1991, as councillor from 1993 to 94, and Deputy Mayor 93 to 94. Interestingly, John opened and closed the Woolwich bars for more than 50 years, always on a voluntary basis. And he was appointed an honorary ranger for the Woolwich bars. Now, John had a number of accolades, but this is a very interesting accolade in a very small community that recognised a terrific effort over a long period of time. He had the authority to act on behalf of the council in the detection of any wrongdoing or vandalism and to report such incidents to the police and or the town clerk so that efforts may be made to apprehend the offenders. The certificate stated that furthermore the public are requested to pay heed to Mr. Collins in any action he may take on behalf of council and to extend to him full cooperation. It's a fascinating recognition of somebody, I think. And as I said, I'm sure it was one of his lesser recognitions in life. The gratitude of council was shown some years later to Mr. Collins at an ordinary meeting held on March the 12th, 2012, when he was again recognised for his service to the community with the words, "In grateful appreciation of your 46 years of outstanding service and dedication as honorary ranger for Woolwich Bars, with authority to act on behalf of council in detection of any wrongdoing or vandalism." John Collins, together with his wife Sue, have been strong supporters of council committees, events, providing support with props at the Clark's Point Australia Day celebrations and beautiful calligraphy for the Australia Day award certificates for many years. John also served on the council's Finance Advisory Committee and other committees of council and local organisations. Those who knew and loved John attended his funeral on Wednesday, November 14 at All Saints Church. There's a little bit of a rundown there on what John has done and the directorships that John has held. Suffice to say, he was a very successful businessman and he held some very senior positions in the industry that he worked in. At his funeral, we also found out that he worked for an Australian organisation called ASIO for a while, so he was recruited by ASIO to do some work, and I didn't know that about him. But he was a very nice man. I worked with him on council committees in the last term of council. I met him on numerous occasions at the club where I'm a member, the Hunters Hill Club, and I always got a very warm welcome of him, even though I didn't know him very well. So I commend this to you. Councillors, would you like to make some comments? Councillor Williams.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I served with John Collins during that council term that he was on. And you're right, he was a very generous and very experienced financial person. And he contributed significantly to the council term and was highly respected in his role as Deputy Mayor. it's interesting, and I also was able to attend his funeral, and there's quite a bit of information that local people in Huntersville probably weren't aware of. And you're right, his role as 007 was facilitated basically through his trailblazing in the textile industry and his access to the textile industry within what was then Czechoslovakia. And he did actually discuss some of those things with me when I was working closely with him. So it wasn't a surprise to me, but I'm sure it was a bit of a surprise to the community. But that's just typically John. He gave and gave and gave and took very little. And he took every opportunity to make sure that he contributed. And it's not noted here, but it was referenced at the funeral, is his significant role in the Chamber of Commerce, not only at New South Wales level, but at the national level, where he was a member as well as president of both those bodies. He provided extensive leadership to those entities. And you referenced the Huntersville Club. He was very significant and instrumental in his leadership there and reshaping the club as both a committee person and subsequently as the president. The club went through a bit of a tough time, and through his leadership he was able to bring them through that. John was clearly loved by all and everybody. And at the funeral there was numerous references to the way that he embraced and engaged with people, not only in a conversational way but in a real meaningful way, and took on his own personal responsibility to help people wherever he could. And those comments by people at the funeral really typified the way he lived his life and ensured that everybody around him had access to his generosity. So he's sadly one of several key Huntersville village citizens we've lost in the last few weeks, and it's quite sad to see Bruce Edelman, Graham Percival, and Paul.
Yes.
Yep. Pass. And I struggle at times to find names of people that are stepping into their footsteps. So they've been legends in our community, given everything to our community, and your tribute here is very fitting to that effort that particularly John has given to our community. It is a much better place for his interest and concern.
Thank you. Any further comments? I'll just finish with a conclusion. A dedicated man who will be greatly missed by his wife Sue, his children Darren, Greg and Amanda, and his grandchildren, family and many friends. So if there's no further comments, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. We move to item 3.1, complying development. Councillor Miles.
3.1. Oh no, sorry. I thought that the speakers tonight were speaking speaking generally, but they are speaking with item 3.1. That's okay.
So there's no quiz. We move to item 3.1, and we have some speakers for this item. We go straight to the speakers, councillors.
Yep.
Speakers, we have Mr. Baird. Welcome, Mr. Baird.
Thank you. So my name's John Baird, and I'm in support of the motion, which I've had the opportunity to read. I live in a heritage listed house built in the 1870s. It was the home to a councillor here and a mayor back in that decade. A private certified development is currently being built next door to my house. With my neighbours, we've identified building work progressing that is outside the certified plans and that also exceed various state regulations. In endeavouring to seek redress, we have found ourselves in a Kafkaesque situation. From the notification of the certifier It states here, and I quote, I'm writing to advise you that the proposed works are classified as a complying development, which means it meets all the standards provided by the state environmental planning policy, and it will be approved no sooner than 14 days from today. Fait accompli. This 14-day pre-approval period is an opportunity for you, that's me and the other neighbours, to discuss the proposed work with the applicant. Although should you make any representation to the applicant, it is important to note that they are under no obligation to make changes to the development. Fait accompli. Complying developments mean faster approval process for the applicant whilst ensuring stringent planning and environmental requirements are met. And that's the end of the note that you get, and that's about it. Our opinion is that the development as it's going now does not meet the standards, SEPP. What we have here is an example of a fundamentally flawed system of a so-called fast-tracked approval system of private certification. And the motion that's before us clearly addresses these matters. Extensive inquiries we have made result in advice that is confusing and conflicting as to who holds responsibility regarding our ability to seek redress. Confusing and conflicting. The certifier has limited enforcement powers. The Building Professionals Board cannot authorise unauthorised work to be rectified and has advised that the council are able to take action in relation to development that does not comply. Council has referred the matters of our concern about non-compliance to the Office of the Minister.
Move to extend.
Move to extend.
Yep.
Councillor Sanderson and Councillor Miles.
The certifier declines to release documentation in support of this documentation in support of what we're trying to request. I've lost my place. Where are we? A letter from the Minister of Planning for Housing directs us to the Council. So we're getting confusing and conflicting advice as to where we go with a simple complaint of what we found. So in conclusion, I'm mindful of the quoted Huddersfield Council values that are at the heart of what they do. Honesty, excellence, accountability, respect and teamwork. Very little of this heart is evident in our current situation. I support the motion so that if it gets up, hopefully others will not find themselves with this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baird. Please stay with us just for a moment. Councillors, are there any questions of Mr. Baird? Councillor Sanderson.
You've expressed some disappointment at the performance of council. Is there any way you would like to expand on that issue?
There's been significant correspondence that covers that. And I don't think we've got enough time to talk about it seriously.
Any specific issues that you...
Well, it goes to the confusing and, dare I say it, inability to really find out whether we're talking to the right people. The inability to find out. Obfuscation, delay.
Thank you.
Councillor Collins.
I was just going to ask, perhaps through you, Mr. Mayor, Steve, is it council hasn't taken action, or that was suggested? Maybe you could elaborate. I know we discussed it before, but what is the situation? Who can stop this from happening?
It's through you, Mayor. It's a current investigation at the moment. Council has been on site and spoken to the residents only last week. And numerous emails have come to and fro with the residents, and at the moment we are still investigating. If there is a breach, we will commence with proceedings or raise it with the certifier. At the moment, to date, there's no particular breach that council should get involved. The issue is that the certifier is acting on behalf of council, and they're doing their role. And any concerns that anybody has should address with the certifier. The certifier has, I believe, only till today met with or spoken to the adjoining owner that's raised issues, and he will be addressing their concerns, and we're following that up as well. Having said that, on site were the Minister's advisors, the Minister of Planning, which is the planning authority with regard to the SEP, also attended the site meeting. There's undertakings, there's two parts of the undertaking. One is that following the requests from the residents and the concerns from other residents in the municipality, that the code needs to be reviewed as a matter of urgency, because the code does not take on board amenity issues such as heritage impact, loss of trees, privacy, adequate setback, overall height, break and relief, and shadows. And the officers did say they would review and respond back. I believe they're going to respond back in writing to all the residents and councils, and I'll transfer that over to all the councillors and the mayor. The second component of it was numerous issues raised with regard to potential possible non-compliances. Those were putting in writing to them. Also, I believe that was raised with the certifier who investigated. We're waiting upon further information to detail and clarify whether or not there are breaches. We need to have our evidence before we assume or take action, and that's where we are at the moment. Council is watching and providing assistance as much as they can, and that's where we are at the moment in a nutshell.
Councillor Miles, did you have a question?
I was just going to ask Mr. Baird. You said that the main concern of residents is that the building is outside of the certified plans that were approved, and that you've just found that there is confusion as to what recourse you and other residents have in relation to whether it's the duty of council, if there are illegal works, to address it, or whether it is the job of the state government. Is that correct?
There's quite a lot of other players that you could get information from, and you don't get the clear answer.
Mm-hmm.
There is no clear answer.
Yep.
So in reference to the motion, which is what we hear about, that would clean that up. It would be much clearer for someone like us, someone like me with a heritage listed house, to understand what form of redress you can take without having to go to fair trading, the builders board, and you name it. So many places that say different things.
How would this motion address the confusion of who to go to? I'm not quite sure how this motion would address that.
Well, I believe it does, and that's why it's here.
But how would it?
Well, I'm not an expert, but I'm reading and seeing that it would come back into council hands, and that there wouldn't be that scatter of activity. A DA, you can read about that, and it's a council thing. If it isn't a DA, it's in this netherworld where we collectively haven't been able to find a pathway.
So, and I'm not having a go at you at all. I'm going to the motion, and obviously there is a lot of frustration about yin or yang, and I would tend to sort of weigh in favour of councils having responsibility for investigating illegal works, but I guess that's what we'll try and address.
Well, in relation to council, we have been raising this with them for, I think it's 7 weeks now, and it's only this week that we've seen any degree of response.
Yeah.
Any degree.
Understood. I think
to get a site meeting and so on.
Okay, Councillor, does that answer your question? Councillor Williams.
Following on from Councillor Collins' question through you to the planning officer, and also listening to Mr. Baird's comments in relation to his dealing with council. I've got over 133 pages of email correspondence relating to this matter, spanning over that 7-week period. And I know council staff has been asked on numerous occasions to act on this issue. Why has it taken 7 weeks for us to get to this point where we're actually doing something?
Through you, Mayor. We followed a process and procedure like we always do. Certify is the first port of call if people have an issue. We've notified and advised all persons that lodge their concerns has to go to the Certify. Council cannot step in until it's seen evidence that there is a breach. We have made contact with the Certify. We were satisfied that all those issues were okay at the time. The building is still being built at the same time. We've had numerous meetings before the 7 weeks. We've had meetings with the general manager. We also agreed to meet on site. So we have tried every avenue to assist and we have responded to all emails with regard to those issues. That's all I can say at this stage.
All right.
The matter's still under investigation.
Councillors, any further questions? Anything for Mr. Baird? Thank you, Mr. Baird. Mr. Feehan, welcome.
Thanks, everyone. My name's Matt Feehan. I'm a resident in Auburn Street, the street behind this development. I'm here today to support the motion, but also similar to my neighbour from Milling Street behind, I was invited to observe the development and now better understand the complexities of CDC developments. I think it's wrong that this has been taken away from council, one, to oversee what development happens in our own backyards. And I think importantly for me with young children, it's critical that the privacy of our children is protected. And that's the first thing that I want the point to make. This development is developed on the rear of the property of a house in the street behind me, alongside a heritage listed premises, where it overlooks 5 swimming pools. I say 5 swimming pools into the backyard of these residents. It has gone outside as has been identified since I first wrote to you, Mayor, and also to Council on the 1st of October when it was brought to my attention by other neighbours. It is quite distressing to a whole range of residents. And it's only through seeing that distress that I do understand now more fully the CDC process and the flaws in being able to get advice and support from Council. And my initial writing to Council on the 1st of October was for that support. All we wanted as a group of residents, and many can't be here tonight, but have met last week with Council, all we wanted 7 weeks ago was appropriate advice and then representation. And unfortunately, the system's failed us. I've been to Council, I've then been to the Certify, I've been to the Building Professions Board, I've been to Fair Trading, I've been to the Minister's Office. We all get redirected back to Council, who has to take action first. The investigations, I've heard that. I'm sorry, I've seen no response as to any result of any investigation other than there is an investigation happening. It's 7 weeks later, and I think what needs to be clear, since raising this, there was also a DA application that was rejected for a further garage at the front of the premises. That was rejected, and as soon as that was rejected, the developer has then got underway post-haste to develop this structure in the last 3 weeks. So the 7 weeks is quite critical. We raised that when we were first notified to protect the yards and the privacy of the adjoining homes. It wasn't built at the front, it was built to the rear, and it intrudes on everyone's privacy. And the only way you can see that is by attending. And my request to councillors that I did write to and to Council was to attend and have a look at the development. From a naked eye, I'm a forensic accountant. I'm not a developer. I'm not someone that knows the planning laws. But what I do know from the naked eye, when it was brought to my attention back in October, when the slab was laid, that it wasn't in accordance with the CDC approved plans. There were DA applications that first went in to say this was a duplex. The residents understood there was a duplex. I think they interacted back.
Move to extend. Councillor Williams, Councillor Miles. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think they then contacted to understand why there was a change from the DA application and this CDC. The residents were unaware as to what the development actually consisted until they saw the slab that was laid. At the same time, the DA application that was put in, the garage at the front had already been laid pre the DA application actually going in. So it was clear to the naked eye that there was inconsistency. And this was the first port of call back to Council and raising it with councillors that we could see from the naked eye there was inconsistency with the plans. What I don't understand is, in order to protect the privacy of residents, of children, of 5 swimming pools around, which in today's environment is quite concerning and of huge risk to me, that a development like this has been able to progress over the last 3 weeks, because what I say has been a lack of action and a lack of support and I think guidance to the residents. I'm not one of the critical properties. I've been asked to get involved, but I do support this as a local resident. I'm adjoining the property to the rear, but it's Mr. Baird and it's Dr. Teo alongside, who have 2 young residents, 2 young children. But you need to attend and look at their backyard. It looks over their playground and the swimming pool, and it is 2 stories high, looking straight into their yard. I would hate for this to happen again, and that's why I'm here. I support the motion. I think we need to protect privacy. Privacy is a critical issue for our young children, and for any regulation such as these CDC regulations to enable that to happen, which I do see there's, and from the research that many residents have been involved in, and some of those are eminently qualified, and they do work within the construction industry. They've done a lot of work because we've had a lack of advice and support. It's been delayed, and we've requested, and there are probably 133 pages of emails, I think, that I've seen, probably more, where we've just been looking for support and advice as local residents. I support it because I don't want to see it happen again. Unfortunately, I keep getting told, because it's now been constructed over the last 3 weeks, there's every chance that this won't be changed, because the Land and Environment Court won't make any changes. So post haste, the developer is developing that property with no regard for the privacy of the residents. And I think, one, it needs urgent attention, it needs urgent investigation. The information we've received is that council can step in and put a stop order whilst it is investigated. Going back to the certifier, which we did, and we contacted, there was a mobile number on the front of the site for the certifier. We contacted that. That wasn't the certifier, it was actually the developer, who then gave the residents a response and said, no, everything's in accordance. We're not technical people. We don't do the measurements. We don't understand the laws. That's what we rely on council to do, and we haven't been supported. And we need that support, and we've been directed back to the state government, and we've had those communications. So I support the motion. I think council needs to oversee these developments, and the residents need support.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Beale. Stay with us just for a moment. Councillor McLaughlin.
Sorry, you just mentioned towards the end of your talk that you've received advice that you can stop the development while the investigation. Could I just get some clarification through you, Mr. Mayor, from Mr. Cruz?
Through you, I'm not aware of that advice. I'd love to see it. The process is, if there is a breach, the certifier initiates an intent to serve an order, and if the certifier is not happy with that and wants council to step in, they advise us, and we do step in, but only upon what the advice from the certifier is. If the certifier is not cooperative, we do step in. We've done it in the past, but it's basically, what is the breach? Is there a breach? And to ensure that we are on the legal avenue with regard to moving forward. People have also got rights on the other side, so you've got to be very careful how we approach matters.
Does that answer your question?
Well, I'm still a bit confused because you say you've got advice to say it can be stopped, but you're saying it's not possible at this point until the investigations.
Is it the 7-day thing?
I think the certifier can issue an intent to serve an order, but we can take legal action. So what actually the process is, the certifier does that. If he's not satisfied with the builder or the applicant, they advise us to step in because we've got the legal arm to go forward. At times, if we feel that we've investigated ourselves and we override the certifier and start legal proceedings if it's a serious matter. As I said, on this particular matter, we are working together with the certifier. We are seeking further advice on some issues, and once we have those clarified, we will take the appropriate action as needed.
Okay, so it could be, be that there will be a stop work order made at some point.
You can't assume. If they breach, there'll be action. They haven't breached at this stage. Just go a little big step back. There was it's why it's confusing. It's a component of on the subject site there was a DA lodged, and the DA was for a garage and other works, and that's what could possibly confuse the residents, and it's confusing, granted. So that part of the application was part of the DA, which the council did refuse. In that process, the applicant lodged constructed a slab. The slab had no approval. We issued a stop work notice on that area, and that was part of our legal proceedings at that point. The applicant now has advised for us not to go to the Land Environment Court because that slab will be removed, partly removed as it gets closer to the driveway component of that construction phase. We are watching that very, very closely. So as till today, I've spoken to the certifier with regard to other works, and he's going to come back to us with further information, and we'll take it from there.
Councillor, is that clear?
I think so.
Councillor Williams.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's
When you
fine.
finish. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the planning manager. I'm confused myself, as the residents are. You're saying there's been no breach, but the development now has a concrete slab that wasn't in the approval through the complying development certificate. Also has brickwork in the front room, which is supposed to be the garage, that's now intended to be as I understand it, a family room or some sort of accommodation room. Why aren't those breaches? You've even said there's a concrete slab there that's not approved. Why does it take so long for council to act on these inconsistency between the planning approvals?
Through you. Question clear?
Yep, through you, Mayor. The slab component is clarified, and the certifier and the owner has actually indicated that's part of the driveway, so there's no breach there. But they'll be further amended as he goes forward with regard to the driveway. He's advised us how he's going to amend that. The breach that we saw on site on Monday, that's the question I've raised with the certifier. He is coming back to us very, very shortly on that. And there might be others that he's clarifying. I just need a survey as well to clarify boundary heights and also RL heights. So once that all's collated, we will look at it in detail. Got to be very careful where we issue an order or intend to serve an order. As I said, people have got rights. The test is, have we been fair and reasonable? And if council is not seen to be fair and reasonable, we would be in breach, and then applicant is able to take us to the Land Environment Court. And the first test there is monetary impact and also a breach of the Act. So I'm going to be very careful and also support council how we go forward on the legal matters. It's not just issuing orders left, right and centre. So we've got to make sure that all our evidence is clear, precise before we take action. Can I assure you that we are and we will be? And obviously I've been out on site myself and know the site very, very well.
Another question, Councillor Williams.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. From my understanding, there is a potential breach in relation to building over a sewer easement. Is that the case?
Like I said, that's part of the investigation.
Councillors, are there any further questions? Councillor Sanderson.
Mr. Fearn, with what you've heard, are you satisfied that council has investigated this thoroughly enough at this point in time?
Probably what I would say. One, no, I don't know the results of any investigation. I think to some of the points that I've just heard, and you know, it is complex. It's complex for lay people, but for the layman to look at the development, and I think to the response I heard there, to look at CDC approved plans, which we had to seek to find out what was being built, which Mr. Baird and the adjoining neighbour did, to look at what was to be a garage, the front right-hand side of this premises, and to see the first construction go up, which was a bay window, that to me, to the naked eye from the street, looks like a breach. I'm not quite sure how it gets any more complex than that. And that's what was raised very early on. The lack of action, and that's what I'm disappointed in, has enabled this to continue. And the structure now towers over the neighbours and looks into the yards and the pool areas of the adjoining premises. So from the response from council, I'm sorry, it's been completely inadequate from my perspective. And I support the motion. I think council needs to have greater ability to interject when there are developments that perhaps go outside what are the certified plans. I think the important issue which I've raised with council is the chronology of events. There are, in my view, there are breaches in as far as works have been carried out, trees have been removed, and the issues that have been highlighted, all prior to any approvals. And it's being retrofitted. So going with total disregard to what the laws are and who is to uphold the law, the chronology of events that have occurred will show that there were CDC plans approved for a certain house and they haven't been adhered to, but they will try and retrofit those post. And the DA application that went in separately for a garage, the structure was already changed. So I am a simple layman. I say that. I can see with my eyes and say with my neighbours, and we see breaches. But to get those, if they're going to be measured, investigated, I understand investigation. I can say that. Not in this instance within the construction industry. I don't know who else we turn to.
All right, thank you. And councillors, any further questions? Please have a seat.
Thank you.
So, I think we have another speaker.
We do. No.
We have Mr. Kuko. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly.
No, that's all right. Thank you, Mayor, Deputy and Councillors. Thank you for letting me address the Council tonight. I speak on behalf of a few residents in Farnell Street that are directly affected by new complying development rules, particularly in respect of the development proposal at 12 Farnell Street. Now, you know that the new complying development rules pay absolute no attention to the current provisions of the Consolidated Development Plan of Hunters Hill, particularly Part 3.5, which is residence amenity provisions. The new complying development rules, and most of the new developments are guided by the new complying development rules, are guided only by the SEP Code, New South Wales SEP Code 2008, which actually does not replicate any of the amenity resident provisions such as solar access or privacy. And we've gone through the experience of our neighbours. We have essentially we have the situation where the new proposed development plans for 12 Farnell Street will completely block solar access of the neighbouring property at 10 Farnell Street. We're talking about an elderly lady who lives alone and relies a lot on northern winter sun for her benefit. That will be completely blocked by the new development proposal. And that is in breach of the Consolidated Development Plan of Hunters Hill, particularly 3.5. But given that the so-called complying development rules are not guided by the Consolidated Development Plan, we actually have the situation where the development occur in Hunters Hill that are actually against in breach of the Consolidated Development Plan of Hunters Hill. So we support the motion, but we believe the council needs to do more than that. Now we have the situation where the residents have never been told that the new complying development process actually makes the key provisions of Consolidated Development Plan in Hunters Hill completely ineffective, and particularly provisions that protect residents' right to some basic human rights such as solar access or privacy. The council's website still talks about the Consolidated Development Plan and makes us believe that those amenity provisions are still effective, but they're not. They're not, and we are talking about the majority of development of proposal in Hunters Hill. I worked for government for 30 years, federal government. I've been the regulator myself. I know that three key principles of any developmental planning or codes are the information disclosure and consultation, independent redress mechanism, and protecting basic human rights such as solar access and privacy. Consolidated Hunters Hill Plan does that, but not the complying development rules. At the moment, residents do not have that information disclosure about the interaction between complying development rules governed by the state government rules and the consolidated development plan. There is no consultation required, as we could see from the example of our neighbours. And effectively, the residents' right to solar access have been taken away from us without us knowing that. So we also have.
Move to extend. Councillor Williams, Councillor Miles, please go ahead.
So we have a very non-consultative process, a lack of information disclosure, a lack of independent redress mechanism, because we were told by Minister Roberts and Minister Roberts' office and by the council that if we have issue, we should raise it with the certifier. The certifier is not responding to our emails. Then we were told to go and raise this with the master builders, with the professionals, builders professional board. So look at the situation. If you're unhappy with the builder, you raise it with another builder. And if you're unhappy with that other builder, you raise it with the builder's professional board. For God's sake, we are taken for a ride. This smells on conflict of interest. And that's the situation we have currently at the Hunters Hill. So we are asking Hunters Hill Council to do more than just raise the motion. We are asking the council to request the government to change the SEP code and replicate the amenity provisions from Hunters Hill Council developmental plan into the SEP code. We ask that if the government doesn't change that urgently, we commence a public action against those complying development rules that are governed by New South Wales government. And if that doesn't help, we request the council to take legal action to protect our rights that are given to us by the Hunters Hill Council developmental plan. This is your plan, this is our plan, and they are in breach of that plan. So, what the council is going to do about it?
Okay, thank you. Councillors, any questions of Mr. Goodall?
Thank you, it's really well put.
Thank you very much. Have a seat. So,
Mr. Mayor, could I move the motion?
Move Councillor Sanderson, seconded Councillor Williams.
If you could bear my indulgence, having heard all that we've just heard, I would like to add 3 small points to the motion. I've made a copy of that available to our minute taker. I think...
could you distribute that to all councillors?
I certainly can.
Please, thank you. Would you have a couple for us to look at up here? Thank you. Thanks. Great. Please go ahead.
Look, having heard all that was said tonight, my concern also is that the community has to have confidence in council. So I'd suggest that while I was the last one to want to amend my own quite well-researched motion, I'd suggest that we add a couple of points to it. Point 6 would be that council call on the General Manager to investigate instances of development in the municipality that has seen or has been issued complying development certificates with not complying with the Code SEP and development not complying with its Code SEP approval. Point 7, the General Manager bring a preliminary report back to the next ordinary meeting of Council as to whether developments such as that at 18 Milling Street, Gladesville, comply with the Code SEP, is being built in accordance with its approval, and whether Council has fulfilled its enforcement obligations in relation to the Code SEP development. And 8, that the General Manager bring a later report back to Council including details requested at point 7 above for all Code SEP approved development where there have been substantive complaints in the
municipality since the 1st of July 1917. Oh, sorry, no, 2017. Showing my age. As I said, I didn't want to amend my own motion. There was a lot of research gone into the original motion. But I do think it's important that the community understands, forgive me, that the community understands the processes that Council has been through. As to the motion itself, I totally sympathise with everyone that's spoken tonight. Complying development has the ability to completely undermine all of our well thought out controls. One of the problems that's occurred with reform in the planning law area in recent times has been that we've seen powers removed from local government, and we had a lot of talk about replacing this with strategic planning. The problem is with the strategic planning processes that are being put in place, they tend to follow the removal of powers. And one of the things that this motion aims to do is we effectively put a stop for the time being to the Part 3 housing code, and at the same time we continue to defer the low-rise medium density housing code. That gives us time for us to go through all the consultation processes, which, I welcome these. The only difficulty with our processes like forming a community participation plan and then going on to perform or to create the local strategic planning statements, and there can be a number of those. I think we're talking about one for Gladesville. I think we need to be talking about them from other areas, and I'd certainly be very sympathetic in a place with such fabulous heritage as Milling Street that should become part of our heritage conservation area. But I think that's something we need to consult the community about. Making changes to our LEP is a long-term process. But if we understand, if you look at the Environmental Planning Assessment Act, the powers that the Minister is given in order to be able to amend a SEP are extraordinary. Probably the only things that really stand in his way are the processes that he probably has an obligation with his government to consult his cabinet. But that change in a SEP can occur very quickly. So the whole idea is that what we do is we request of the Minister that he suspend the operation of the Housing Code Part 3. And we're not just doing that for a time, we're doing it until we've had the opportunity to go through the consultation processes with our community. And at the end of that, hopefully we've got some substantial amendments to our LEP that are going to provide further protections. I think this is the correct process to go through. And I think the other point to make is that I think reform has to start at a local government level. Quite clearly, individuals are not having much luck in their wanting to engage with these processes. And this is something, and I think the report that I've written for this motion does cover a lot in fairly brief terms. But the point that was made by Amelia Thorpe, who's a researcher in this area, that the process has been a victim of itself. The fact that the norm is that people object to a development at the DA stage has created this a process that involves it's an adversarial approach, and the result has been that delay has become, or delays have come about through there being this adversarial approach, and then protest becomes synonymous with consultation. And the result has been that governments successively have managed to, rather than come up with means of more directly consulting with communities, what they've gone about doing is to just continue to silence communities. And this process has continued, particularly with complying development. As complying development was originally introduced, it was just compliance with the council's own codes. The original SEP number 60 did deal with issues like overshadowing. That went in 2008 with the 2008 amendments to the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. And now we see on the horizon a worsening of the situation where we're going to have potentially, well, I mean, if nothing else happens, by July 1, we will have low-rise medium density housing. And that's going to even further impact on the potential development here and elsewhere. I've tried to deal with the motion also in a way that it's got broad application, because this isn't just a problem in Hunters Hill, it applies all over the state. So I've had a bit to say about it. I think I'll have a bit more to say in the right of reply, but I'd commend the motion as I propose to amend it. Thank you.
Anybody wishing to speak against the motion?
I just have a question.
Who's your question on?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Sanderson, if I may.
Thank you.
Councillor, in Part C, the suspension of application of codes, etc., housing code, remain in place until there's been a reasonable opportunity for, and each of those points start to or refer to councils. And I just wonder, have you done that intentionally, and if so, why?
Yes, Mr. Bear, as I started to explain, there is a process that we need to go through that the amended Environmental Planning Assessment Act will put us through. It'll be the first time ever, so I think we're all waiting to learn more about it. But it does provide us with an opportunity to consult with our community, and when we get to the point of making our community consultation plan, I'll hope this council doesn't just accept the minimum. I hope that we're in there doing everything that we can to empower our community with a right to say. So that's part of the process. The next part of the process is that we have to form...
Is the question, is the council or councils, is it plural?
That's what I'm
or is it
asking.
singular?
Well, my apologies. Councils, I refer to it as more than plural. I mean every council in the state.
Okay.
I think it's essential that they all have the opportunity to consult with their communities. And as I said, I've drafted this motion in a broad way in the hope that other local governments will also pick this up.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Who would like to? Is anybody wishing to speak against the motion?
No, but I've got questions of this, if you don't mind.
But do you wish to speak against the motion?
I will, yes, but I would like
clarification
questions
first.
Yes, clarifications. Actually, just elaborating on Councillor Crasoy's question. You start off at A, asking for a suspension for Hunters Hill, and yeah, so you're then moving into all count. So are you suggesting that we ask for it to be suspended across the state?
No,
or just for Hunters Hill?
I believe that that's up to individual councils. We don't want to go interfering with their matters. If others choose to follow our action, I hope that they would ask for that suspension, but that's a matter for other individual councils.
Okay. Councillor Collins, you have another question?
Yeah, so the local government areas in deferred area defined in clause 3B.63, is that Hunters Hill, is it?
No, Councillor Collins. There's a number of councils listed in that area. I believe there are 50 of them. I think most of them are metropolitan councils, but they are councils like us who raised a question with the application of Part 3B being the low-rise medium density housing code. Other councils that I can think of locally are Ryde, Lane Cove, Mossman and others that have asked for that, and they've been granted exemption from that code until 1st July 2019.
Councillor Collins, any further clarifications?
No, I think I understand. So you're actually the letter. I just want to confirm that the letter we're writing to the minister is to ask for it to be suspended across all those councils you mentioned. Is that right or not? Because I'm sorry, I find it very wordy, and I'm just trying to get my head around
Councillor
exactly
Collins,
what you're trying to.
I think the words are necessary to define what we're trying to do.
Answer the question. It's very simple.
Well, the answer to that particular question is, in terms of the Part 1A of the motion, is that that is specifically for us, and it's up to other councils what they may wish to do. With Part B, we are part of a group of 50 councils
that have been given that exemption. Now, that exemption could continue, but they may choose not to follow that. But that appears to be the fairest way to deal with that.
Councillor Collins, is that clear to you?
It's as clear as it will be to me.
Okay. Do you now wish to speak against the motion?
Yes, I do. Look, I'm trying to reconcile this motion with. First of all, I think that these extra ones really could be a separate motion that would be more appropriate to what's happening in Milling Street. I'm trying to reconcile this motion about asking for complying development to stop completely with what's happening in Milling Street, which is obviously not a good result. And from my understanding, council will be concluding an investigation on Milling Street, and if if it doesn't comply, then action will be taken. Is that correct, through you, Mr. Mayor?
That's my understanding, yes.
So, this is the complying development that happened in Milling Street is not a complying development because it doesn't comply with the investigation. So I'm just trying to understand why we are asking to, why these two things are tied together. It appears that that Milling Street doesn't comply and it should be stopped. And perhaps an investigation will cover that. So look, council hasn't taken action on Milling Street yet. Well, we're investigating it. If it turns out to be done incorrectly, then stop orders will be issued, I'd imagine, and it will be rectified. So I think, and perhaps that might not have been communicated as well as it could have been. But this is just a case of completely throwing out the entire. I think that the code definitely needs work. There are controls that have been mentioned by the speakers tonight that are in our, that are in our controls that don't apply to the complying developments. I understand that they've been looked at to be brought into the code, so the complying development system in general can actually provide a lot of benefit to council. It's my understanding that the fees that we get for DAs do not cover the costs of development. Is that correct? Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor.
Sure, that's correct.
Yeah. So this system represents a cost-shifting initiative away from council. If it's done correctly, at the moment, it needs work. These private certifiers have not been held to account as they should be. That definitely needs to change. But if we have a good system where we had good private certifiers that were held to account, that did act responsibly and did act according to the codes that would enforce all the codes we currently have in 80% of our in the conservation area, it would save us a significant amount of money if we did not have to do all these DAs. At the moment, this council is actually struggling to turn a profit. I mean, we've got we've got a rate increase coming up next year, and one of the things that many councils are complaining about is cost shifting to council. This to me sounds like the first initiative I've seen where it's cost shifting away from council. So I would rather see it us trying to, it's going to stay. If it can work better, I would rather try and improve the system than flat out say that this should be all handled by council, because I think the system could work. It's not working for us at the moment, but if it was fixed, it could work, it could save us a lot of money, and it could allow us to retain our independence because financially we are, look, to be perfectly frank, financially the outlook is not very good for us. So I do not support.
Councillor Collins. Anybody wishing to speak for the motion? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do take exception to Councillor Collins' view that council is struggling financially. I don't see that as being the case. That council is putting in place the necessary arrangements to ensure that we are viable at the moment, and we will continue to be viable from a financial point of view. Moving to the substantive issue that's before us here today, my initial comment will be that the original motion and the additional amended motion are relevant and are thought together. One is action, the other is consequence. We have a process where actions are taking place through the Complying Development Code, which have consequence, which we've heard about tonight. And I think what Councillor Sanderson mentioned, this is not an isolated issue. It's not isolated in Hunters Hill to just these two issues. It is far-reaching, and I've been talking to Mossman and I've been talking to North Sydney and a whole range of councils that also share concerns about complying development. Maybe a bit different to ours, but in the same light. So I see items in this motion from 1 to 5 and 6 to 7 as being compatible and are relevant to be within the one motion. It's probably also of interest to the residents that prior to this council meeting, council had its private briefing, which did raise this issue. So I do apologise for you that you weren't around for those discussions or questions that were asked, because I think it's important that residents are made available to them all the information and discussions, questions asked that councillors use in their decision-making processes. Bringing me to this issue, we've heard tonight that a lot of this is about bureaucratic buck passing, with both partners, both parties being council and the government, playing each other off. The community need and deserve clarity of roles and responsibilities. The lack of the ability for the community to access information and advice on this issue is stark, and we've heard it here as some examples tonight. And there are also numerous other examples which I've been talking to residents about, which council knows about. Milling Street's a classic. Not Milling Street, Milling is a classic, but Mark Street is another classic where complying with private certification has been raised on numerous accounts by resident, and council's simple response is take that to court yourself. I think that is totally unsatisfactory. We've got this as being also one of the critical issues for not only local democracy in our community, but also the well-being of our community. We've heard tonight how distressed people are and how intrusive this process is on people's lives. And also we've heard from Councillor Sanderson that it is taking control away from the local people and has inappropriately put it in the hands of the development industry. I don't think anybody can deny that the process is now skewed to the developers rather than where it should sit, and that's community interest. Now, there's a whole series of very, very sadly wrong policies that have been developed by successive governments over the last 7 years. We've had complying development guidelines, and they've changed to morph more away from community, more towards development. We've had the private certification fiasco, which I think even the government believes is broken. We then had forced merger processes, which were designed, I believe, and many in the community believe, to take the opportunity for residents, take their opportunity to have a say in what happens in their local area, put it into a much larger entity that is more impersonal. We've had recently mandatory local planning panels introduced, again taking away the opportunity for the community to have control and responsibility around local decision making, particularly around what happens next door to them. And we've had a compliance process which is unclear, muddy. We can't even get advice from our own staff as to what is the correct process and how that should be acted.
Councillor, your 5 minutes is up, and you're
My
speaking
goodness.
about a number of topics that are different to what we're talking about tonight.
No, it's not.
Do you
It's
wish
all
to
it's all
continue?
relevant, Mr. Mayor.
Do you wish to continue?
I do. Yes, please.
Go ahead.
Thank you. This has further served to remove the local community from the decision-making process and what takes place in the local area. Elected councillors are no longer representing their community in this area, and we've now seen the consequence, the real consequence of that within our local community. It places development above community interest. It results in one-size-fits-all and little regard to local strategic planning instruments such as our LEP and our DCP. We've heard from residents and heard from Councillor Sanderson as to how significant that is. It's based on a formulaic process, which is all about flat earth. It depends on the volume of the site, the width of the site, and then everything else flows from that, assuming that it's flat. That does not happen in Huntersville. There's very little flat land. And as a consequence, that then allows or initiates a whole range of consequences in the community. We've heard about privacy. We've heard about loss of solar access. We've heard about no consideration of heritage. We've heard about people not knowing what's going on next door to them. We've heard about it doesn't fit in the context of what we expect in our planning instruments. We've heard about landscaping not being adequate. I can't find much in the Complying Development Code that is relevant to our planning instruments. And we've heard here tonight many people have also expressed that view. And I believe it should be back with the council and back with the community to be making these decisions. So I support what Councillor Sanderson is proposing tonight, and that's the importance of getting this current process stopped and having it fit the appropriate context and location rather than one size fits all. We've been through a series of fiascos in planning in this state, and I've been fighting those issues for the last 7 years along with many other residents and other people across Sydney. We had the fiasco of the hazard planning proposals, which was going to...
moving away from the issue.
No, it's all relevant to the history and why we're here today. We've been through a succession of changes to the planning codes, from farcical ones where there was going to be no zoning, and it's all an iterative process leading us up to where we are today, a planning scheme that no longer has the confidence of the community, a planning scheme that is skewed towards those that are potentially making profit out of it. We've heard tonight that the community has lost confidence and credibility in the scheme. And I must confess, listening to the staffers of the minister, they expressed that they wouldn't like that development next door to them either. So the government should be held accountable for this flawed process, needs to respond by placing immediate constraints on complying development. And that is really easy to do. You don't have to revise the policy, you just limit its footprint and its location. It's council's obligation to its community to advocate for it and help it through this process. We've heard here tonight the council, according to the residents, and I trust what the residents are saying, is falling short in its obligations to provide information and to respond to the community concerns. As I mentioned, I've got 133 pages of dialogue from residents, and council is only now acting on it 7 weeks later. I don't think that's good enough. I think council needs to be much more responsive. And it's one of the issues that I hold dear and one of the issues I stood on.
Councillor, you've now spoken for 10 minutes.
Could I have another 5?
With the grace of the councillors,
No, not from me.
move to extend.
I think we're digressing.
Councillor Sanderson,
I think it's been
do you have a second? Councillor Williams, seconded. Councillors, those in favour of Councillor Williams continuing on?
Well, it's a sad day, Mr Mayor, that the councillor is gagged, but I will say the level of complexity demands a detailed response by council, and it needs to engage with its community. And I thank Councillor Sanderson for his expert advice, his knowledge and passion which he's put into his motion. So I commend the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Those wishing to speak against? Councillor Miles.
Mr Mayor, again, I just want to raise before I start talking that once again we have a pre-prepared, typed out piece of amendment here that wasn't provided to councillors prior to the briefing. It's obviously been prepared prior to the meeting, and we're getting it now at the 10th hour on a motion that is already very complex. And I think that there are some confused issues in this motion that probably need to be separated into several motions, which is what Councillor Collins alluded to. But I will speak against the motion insofar as I think that it is confusing a number of different issues. The residents of Milling Street rightfully have an issue with a CDC that is being investigated by council. Number one, it may be non-complying, and number two, obviously there are problems with the code that need to be addressed. That are more wide-ranging than Hunters Hill. We're listening to you. We're listening to what you're bringing to us, and it is our job as council to advocate for you to the state government and to the minister how those what effect is being had by that policy and what changes need to be made. And I think from tonight we will do that. Going to the motion and why I think that the motion, number one, will not have the desired effect, and number two, is going to essentially over-politicise and over-complicate a range of issues. I will go through the motion itself. Part 1A and B, we already had an exemption granted to us to the medium density housing code. And I apologise if this gets overly technical because it is obviously confusing. We and other councils have had that exemption on the basis that we were going to amend our LEPs consistent with our DCP and the stringent controls that Hunters Hill should have in place for these sorts of developments. And I believe that that's in train. Further to that, it is only, I believe, down to a number of streets in which that code could be assessed. And none of those streets could have manor houses in them. So my understanding is that is already underway, and stretching that out for another year when the staff are obviously already going through that process is it will have no effect. The Complying Development Code having a blanket ban across Hunters Hill, well, this is a code that stretches across metropolitan Sydney. The problem isn't that the code should be not assessed on Hunters Hill. The problem is that the code needs to be amended to take into effect problems with privacy, problems with overshadowing, problems with setbacks, problems with removal of trees. That's the problem.
Madam, excuse me, Madam, I'm sure you have a very good point, but please don't enter the debate. Please don't enter.
Can't I agree?
Please, could I ask you to keep silent? Allow the councillors to debate it. Thank you very much.
The problem is with the code itself, not that it's being applied to Hunters Hill. We need to advocate to the Minister and to the Department of Planning that the code needs to change, not just to give effect to Hunters Hill not being assessed, that everywhere across metropolitan New South Wales, this code should be addressing the issues of residents. Those 2 points do not come even close to achieving that outcome. Suspending the suspension of the application, that's part C, again, council giving effect to a suspension or not giving effect to a suspension because we're not going to get an exemption to a blanket code is not going to allow us to go into a process of public consultation because, number one, we're not having any active dialogue with the department, which is what we should be having on this issue. And number two, the department are simply not going to issue blanket bans over random councils because they have problems with the code. It's not going to happen. Legislation being amended to exclude Part 3, that's fine. Point 2, to avoid doubt, it is intended that the control in the LEP would not permit complying development where it is excluded Part 1 division. I don't think that should be a part of the motion. That should be, Councillor Sanderson should talk to that. That's not a relevant piece of the motion. That in the event that the suspension of the application of the code's SEPP Part 3 Housing Code, as per point 1 above, not in place in time to commence from 1st of March 2019, the Council prepare a planning proposal for the LEP to include the entire municipality of Hunters Hill in a heritage conservation area. This has been tried and tested. This has been done multiple times. And every time we've made that application, which would cost money, council's money, which again, as Councillor Collins pointed out, we're not aflush with, it's been rejected on planning grounds. Senior planners in the department, senior planners, are giving us the advice that not everywhere in Hunters Hill has to be a conservation area, that in fact it shouldn't be a conservation area in certain parts of Hunters Hill. That's the advice from senior planning minds. And I think that if you do that, all you'll be doing is trashing more cash, because we will get the same answer that we've had the last 3 times that we've attempted to do that. Council right to the Honourable Anthony Roberts, that's fine. The council engaged with other councils, that's fine.
Councillor, you've spoken for 5 minutes.
I'll seek an extension if I could. I'll promise not to go past 10.
Councillor McLaughlin, second. Councillor Williams, all in favour? That's passed.
And then to the amended motions, the additional part of the motion, I think that again should be something separate. Of course we should audit where there are non-compliances by the code in our own backyard. That should be part of a consultative process with the Minister's office and with the department to say, your code is inadequate and this needs to be addressed. That's what this motion should be about. It shouldn't be about we should be exempt because we're Hunters Hill. It should be the code is not doing the job that it's designed to do. It is inadequate in the minds of our residents, and as your advocates, we should be out there talking to the Minister and the Department to make sure that those adequacies are put in place. In terms of the chronology and timeline of the CDC, Council should be communicating that to you much better. And I'd be raising another component to this motion, that Council should put a timeline or a chronology of events for CDCs on our website and communicate to people that are contacting Council with issues, lay out exactly how this code works and who is responsible of what point. Equally, we need to, and I will actually raise an amendment to the motion that Part 1 become that Council write to the Honourable Anthony Roberts, Minister for Planning, recommending that a review of the complying development code be conducted immediately with the view to addressing issues to do with transparency, privacy, solar access, tree removal, public and private amenity, setbacks, finishes and bulk and scale. And topography.
So, Councillor, are you moving an amendment?
I will move an amendment.
Foreshadowing.
I'll move an amendment.
All right, let's make sure that we've got it clear. Would you like to?
I'll reread it. The part one of the motion become that Council write to the Honourable Anthony Roberts, the Minister for Planning, recommending that an immediate review. Sorry. Of CDCs take place, giving special regard to privacy, solar access, tree removal, public and private amenity, setbacks, topography, and bulk and scale.
Councillor, I wonder if heritage...
And heritage.
When you say heritage, do you mean adjoining heritage or...
Heritage, yes.
In conservation?
Heritage
Yes,
conservation.
heritage and conservation, fine with that. I would also move as an amendment the deletion of parts 2, 3, 4, parts 2, 3 and 4. And I apologise to Council and to those here how complex this is, but it is a very long and wordy motion.
Would you like to just have a seat for a moment while we bring this up and then you can confirm that it's correct?
Mr Mayor, to help the gallery and to help me down here, could the font size just be increased so it fills the page, please?
Yeah. So the other issues were heritage and conservation?
Heritage and conservation, topography, yeah. Heritage and conservation.
It needs to be more explicit.
That's correct. And the further amendment was, I don't think we'll take it out, just the
Parts 2, 3, 4 of them, and the further amendments are fine, they're in there.
2, 3 and 4. So perhaps Council would like to have a look at what's listed in 2, 3 and 4. I wouldn't cross them out just yet, we'll acknowledge that. Okay, so we'll deal with the amendment. Do you like to speak to the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Apologies if I breached the 10 minutes. Overall. Again, the question that we're asking here is, do we put a motion forward that will give effect to change, or do we put a motion forward to achieve a political outcome? I'm hearing today that the code has obviously got glaring flaws, and Cruno was suggested that this very thing happened. That obviously amendments need to be made to the SET and to the CDC code to make sure that this doesn't happen, not just in Hunters Hill, but everywhere. Us applying for blanket bans, which we won't get, us applying for conservation zones that are blanketed across Hunters Hill, which we won't get, will give effect to nothing. Consulting with the Minister, consulting with the Department, consulting with our community who are feeling the strain of this CDC, and I, again, say to the residents adjoining that house that it obviously has glaring failures. We want to address that so it doesn't happen anywhere, not so it doesn't happen in Hunters Hill. It's our job to communicate back to our state and federal representatives your concerns, and this is the way to do it. Just passing motions because we feel good about it won't give effect to anything. Passing motions that have a pathway to communicate and consult and to effect change will.
Right, thank you, Councillor. Is there somebody who would like to speak against? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Councillor Miles has lost the train of the argument with most of what he said. The motion doesn't propose to scrap complying development. If you read the report that I've put together, and I know Council will appreciate that, I put a significant time of study into this area over the recent months and investigated this very carefully, and it is a well thought out motion. It doesn't propose to reduce complying development, or to stop complying development completely. What it proposes to do is to allow communities to choose where complying development will be appropriate in their areas. And as we've heard from Councillor Williams and from the General Manager reports of the at what occurred at the Local Government New South Wales Conference, the burning issue was how complying development impacts on their particular areas. Now, the point of comparison I would make, and Councillor Williams referred to the fiasco of Hazard's proposals, well, I'd almost suggest we're in just about as bad position as we would have been if the Planning Bill 2013 had been enacted in its entirety. At least the Planning Bill 2013 proposed that some of what they called, the 80% that was going to either be code assessed or alternatively assessed on complying development. So that complying development would continue, but the code assessment component of that were codes that were locally developed. We had some say into that. Now, what Councillor Miles proposes is that we amend a well-constructed, thought-out motion that, sure, the Minister may choose not to accept it, but we've put our point, and I think it's a valuable point to have on there. It's not political. I'll be very happy if any party picks it up. I'm completely unfazed by that. But the thing is, if you start building things like overshadowing heritage and every other issue into complying development, it's no longer a simplified code that people can go and tick boxes on. Now, simplified codes that people can go tick boxes on may apply in parts of Blacktown. They may apply in parts of rural New South Wales.
They may even apply certain corners of certain municipalities on flat earth, and they're not worried about shadowing. They're not worried about oversight because the blocks are large enough for those sort of issues not to come into it. Complying development has its place, but it's not in hilly terrain and conservation area. But to say that no, we want you to improve the code. At the end of the day, if you've got your wish list of all the things you want to happen to the code, effectively that would be abolition of codes. They would no longer work because it would no longer give the fast-track approach. Now, no government is going to accept that, and you know that very well. Doesn't matter who's re-elected in March. That will never happen. This at least puts an idea on the board, which will allow people to... this is an idea that people have, what I'm asking for is not for the abolition of codes, it's just for us to go through a process where we consult with our community, we're given time for that consultation to occur before we sign off on our LEP, and and you agreed with that particular point that LEPs be given the power to be able to exclude code development from parts of their municipality where they're not suitable. It's not a case of complying development being all bad. It might be fine in some places, but clearly it's not suitable in Milling Street. It's not suitable in our heritage conservation areas, and it's not suitable in most other areas in Hunters Hill. I mean, I don't know where it would be, but there might be some block of land somewhere where it would be okay, where it's not going to impact on people. That's the choice we want.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Could I remind everybody we're dealing with an amendment to the motion, which is on the screen at the moment. 1, and to delete part 2, 3 and 4. Is anybody wishing to speak for the amendment?
Oh, look, I'll just briefly...
Councillor Collins.
I'll just briefly say that I support the amendment because I actually think it will have an outcome, and I do not believe that what you've got here already is going to do anything other than complain. So we need to get this fixed, and this is the fastest way to do it.
Thank you. Anybody wishing to speak against the amendment? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Councillor Sanderson that this is not going to fix the problem, and it's conjecture that what Councillor Sanderson is proposing will not succeed. I just don't accept that as being a valid point. What Councillor Sanderson's motion does deliver is relief. It does deliver the opportunity to have the code suspended until we do have time to go through this process. To jettison the opportunity to have the code suspended or put on hold in our area must be the primary task, because to go down Councillor Miles's process, which is commendable, but it's going to take a long time. We know how long these processes work when you're talking to government agencies and departments and ministers that may or may not be there in a period of time. I think the community demands action now. Councillor Sanderson's motion delivers that. Councillor Miles's amendment just puts it out to the never. So I don't support the amendment. I believe action should take place through Councillor Sanderson's motion. The community demand it. The community want change, want certainty, and you're not going to get it through a talk fest. All those points are relevant and will be discussed under Councillor Sanderson's original motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody wishing to speak for the amendment? Anybody else wishing to speak against the amendment? I'll put the amendment. Those in favour? Against? That's lost. So we're back to the original motion with the, and I think you've incorporated points 6, 7 and 8 in the original motion. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
So where were we at with that? We were at for and against, and I'm not quite sure where we got to with that.
It's up to 4.
4, are we? Thank
Councillor
you.
Miles was against.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. 4? Councillor McLaughlin, thank you.
I absolutely would like to thank Councillor Sanderson for this motion and the work that he's put into it. It is incredibly well researched as always, and I feel very confident in what he's put forward for our community. But I won't go into the reasons why I support the motion because they were well articulated by Councillor Williams, and I don't need to add to that. I do have a couple of minor amendments that I would like Councillor Sanderson to consider. Earlier in the evening, we received a professional briefing about the planning powers of the Greater Sydney Commission being handed across to the Department of Premier and Cabinet. I'm just wondering if perhaps this motion should also be copied to the Department of Premier and Cabinet. And my second proposed amendment is in relation to point 3, where you talk about in the event that the suspension of the application for the housing code is not put in place in time for it to commence from the 1st of March 2019, that Council prepare a planning proposal. I'm just wondering if we could reconsider that and reconsider our options when after the 1st of March 2019, because I think we need to really look at preparing a planning proposal for the LEP to include the entire municipality of Hunters Hill is going to be a very onerous and long process. I think we need to look at our options. We need to discuss how we put that into place, how it works for the council and councillors and the community before we go ahead straight into that. So I'm wondering if that can just come back to council for consideration.
So, Councillor Sanderson, are you able to consider those two things?
I'll accept those two amendments.
Right. Thank you.
And other than that, we've had this problem for a long time. We absolutely appreciate the impact that it is having on residents. Councillor Sanderson's motion is hopefully going to address some of these issues moving forward, and the points that he has added to the motion we are hoping will also flush out some of the problems that we're having from this issue as well. So thank you.
So if I might go back to Councillor Sanderson, with the input from Councillor McLaughlin, are you willing to suggest any change?
I'll leave that to Councillor McLaughlin. You've got some notes on it, I don't.
Oh, the wording?
Yes.
So
part 3, is it?
So part 3 would read from the third line, 1 March 2019, that Council reconsider its options, including the preparation of a planning proposal for the LEP to include the entire municipality of Hunters Hill.
Right, just one minute. Is that correct at the moment?
I can't read it. It's even too small for me. Is that what I just said? Yes. And perhaps, I don't know, perhaps point 9 becomes that a copy of the recommendation be forwarded to the Department of Premier and Cabinet.
Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. So, Councillor Sanderson.
I'm fine with those amendments.
All right. So that becomes part of the original motion.
I accept it.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Yeah. All right. So anybody wishing to speak against?
I actually have a question.
Question.
About that point 3, if I may, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to assume it's to you, Mr. Grippus. Is what Councillor Miles suggested correct, that Council have had 3 cracks at trying to have the whole municipality listed as a heritage conservation area, I know of one, and is it true that we have tried 3 times and failed and been told why?
Through you, Mayor. Prior to me being here, I knew of when the initial conservation area was proposed, was the whole municipality, and the outcome was the conservation area as it is today was 75%. There was question during the amalgamation issue with regard to reviewing that and looking at a conservation area as a whole. We've had advice on that, and that's the only 2 parts that I know of.
As Meatloaf said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Thank you, Councillor. All right, Councillor Cresswell, further questions?
Well, just a little more on that. Earlier we spoke in a briefing about some timelines on when we review our local environment plan, and I believe that the end result of that process will be more like June 2020. Is that correct? By the time
That's correct.
I don't know if I want to speak for or against it, but it's the part 3 that's bothering me. So can I just...
Please go ahead.
I just have a little concern around part 3. Firstly, because I'm mindful of Councillor Collins' comment about us unwisely funneling money into something we know we can't win. And if we have had several goes at it and we know we can't win it, I just think it's going to be a very lengthy and expensive process, the development of the application in itself, let alone the pushing through of it. So I'm really conscious about that part 3. And I think that our LEPs would, if they're done properly, would reflect our values of how we would like to see our whole municipality developed. And if in the rest of Councillor Sanderson's incredibly well-prepared motion, if in the rest of that we're addressing our other issues around complying developments in our area, having to comply with our own LEPs, then I would think that the LEP process we're currently going through, which is due to finish in 2020, I'm sure as a council we're going to design it, and as a community you'll be consulted on it. I'm sure that would answer that without us having to go to this incredibly expensive and probably fruitless process. So I'm just suggesting that perhaps...
Question is...
Well, it's I'm speaking to it now. So I'm just suggesting that, okay, it's a question to, to Mr. Karipis on that, is will our LEP address our concerns around the values that we want in our whole municipality by 2020 June, I guess?
That's the through you, Mayor. That's the intent.
Yeah.
The intent is the statements, the local planning statements are part of that process. And when you look at the CSP and the community is also talking about trees and heritage, that might come out of the wash. So it might come out that the community wants us to increase our conservation area or incorporate the whole municipality in the conservation area. So that might come out in the wash with regard to the consultation and the process. And that is probably my thoughts, that would be part of the overall process of the LEP anyway, so like you say.
But a point of clarification just on the amendment is that what we've amended doesn't actually tie us into doing this. It's just asking us to look at options and reconsider and consider our options at that time, including that as a possibility. It may not be.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you, that helped. So if it's just something we will consider in March 2019, then we can debate that then.
That's right. That was my intention.
Thank you, that helped.
Councillor
When it comes back to council, we consider it then.
Councillor Williams.
I think the matter's resolved, but just a point of clarity in terms of why we weren't successful the first time round for conservation area. I was mayor at the time, and the department said that would create a precedent for other councils. It wasn't that we didn't qualify for it, but they were worried about precedent. We now have a range of other factors that are limiting councils' ability to get suitable development, and I think that is a very compelling argument to take it back to government to include the whole conservation area.
Thanks for the clarification, appreciate it. So is there anybody wishing to speak against? Councillor Miles.
Not to speak against, I'd like to propose an additional... What can't I do?
Haven't you already spoken against
No,
it?
I'm proposing an additional point. Shock horror, I don't think the residents really care about a letter being sent to the department. I don't think that they really care what was spoken about at a local government conference earlier this year. The only practical thing that I can possibly bring back to this motion is potentially putting in that council does when residents are looking to figure out how this code is working, that council communicate on its webpage a timeline or a chronology of events about who is responsible for what and when. That's the only practical thing I think that can come out of tonight.
Okay, so you're proposing
that amendment.
And so where would you...
Number 9, that council, the council communicate on its website a chronology of events / timeline for the CDC process and make it available to the general public.
So as to inform the general
So as to inform the community.
Once more.
To inform the community.
Now, Councillor Sanderson,
This is my right reply.
are you happy to incorporate that change in your
I'm happy to
motion?
incorporate that.
I'm happy, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Is it clear to everybody the change suggested by Councillor Miles that Councillor Sanderson has added to his amendment? All right, do we have anybody wishing to speak against? Anybody else who hasn't spoken wish to speak for? I think it only leaves you, Councillor Cresswell. If there's nothing more, I'll hand it back for right of reply to Councillor Sanderson. Thank you, Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief. I thank Councillor Miles for his amendment. I normally get into trouble for having long, wordy motions, and you've expanded it to a record. It's now 9, and the last one I had that sort of substance got reduced
11,
to 10.
12.
Or got reduced to 6, I believe. Look, I think we've had a great debate on this, and I think we all understand the importance of doing something about the client development, its impact, and not just the impact in Huddersfield, its impact everywhere. And I think this way of approach means that local government is starting that reform process, and I can't see that it's going to come from anywhere else. It's up to local government to do something about this. Our communities have been shut out of the process. And if we wait for one persuasion of state government or the other to do something, it'll never happen, because at the end of the day, I mean, if you read the report, it's just been a constant downhill slide since complying development was established in 1997 by the amending act at that time. It is a hidden process, but I think at the end of the day that this is the best solution. I thank Councillor McLaughlin for her clarifying amendments, and at the end of the day I think I look forward to this council being generous in the voice it gives to its community, so that we get an LEP that speaks for our whole community.
and that I expect out of that process, I guess the writing the whole of the municipality, making the whole of the municipality of Hunters Hill a heritage conservation area was a fallback position in this motion. I think it's something that rightly should be debated by the people of Hunters Hill. Good solution, but at the end of the day, our communities have to be happy for it. And I tell you what, it certainly support that Milling Street becomes part of a heritage conservation area. I was up there today, and some of the heritage items up there are just absolutely spectacular, and it's very sad that it's got to this where we have a development that is detracting from it. As I said in part of the report, it's unfortunate this solution can't fix up mistakes of the past. I hope it puts something on the table that will be considered by other levels of government, and we do start to get some reform going. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. I'd like to thank you for the work you put into this too. I think it is a burning issue that's dogged us for a number of years now. And I think it's a great approach you've taken to it, so thank you very much for your effort. So, if there are no further clarifications or questions, I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried.
Mr Mayor, can there be a division on that? Make sure.
I'm sorry, division?
Yes.
No, not a division. It's too late for that, but names can be recorded in the division can only be called before the vote.
Yeah. Just record the votes.
Report the votes, please.
Thank you, will do. Councillor Miles and Councillor...
Sorry, that's being recorded, right?
Yeah, it's
Collins
needs to
against.
be in the documentation.
Mr Mayor.
Councillor Miles.
Sorry, given that there is another speaker for item 4.3, could I move item 4.3 ahead, given that...
Move Councillor Miles, second Councillor McLaughlin. And the speaker we have for that is Mr Ward. Thank you, Mr Ward, for your patience. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
For your riveting.
Thank you, councillors. Corporate owners of the Gladesville Bridge Marina in Drummoyne want to double its size by extending concrete pontoons from 5 Dock Point to the Gladesville Bridge, increasing the capacity of the marina from 50 to 114 boats. The Gladesville Bridge Marina was extended without proper community consultation back in the year 2000, and in turn the bay is already overdeveloped. Hunters Hill Municipality is now being threatened by this overdevelopment, and if successful, it will create an even bigger eyesore on one of the narrowest stretches of the Parramatta River. Whilst we recognise the need for boating facilities on the harbour, any further development of this marina will benefit a select few and will restrict the wider community access to the river and impact on the full enjoyment of this beautiful waterway for future generations to come. This stretch of river is used daily by sailors, rowers, kayakers and fishermen. In addition, patronage for ferries on the Parramatta River has, I'm told, been increased by nearly 20% in the last 12 months. With a population boom underway, 4 new ferries have been bought by the state government with a view to transiting residents living along the waterway to and from the city. The proposed marina development will likely pose a danger to the navigation channel of these vessels in an already congested part of the river. The unacceptable visual impact on Drummoyne, Hunters Hill, Henley and Huntleys Point, especially for residents living on or near the river shoreline, will be significant. We expect the development could have a negative impact on tidal flow and potentially cause other environmental and habitat issues in the bay. I think it also important to note that 2014 marked the 50th anniversary of the opening of the Gladesville Bridge, and that it has now been added to the State Heritage Register. Although the marina is only in the early stages of their proposed development, I strongly urge the Council to object to any development on behalf of the Hunters Hill Municipality and the wider Sydney community that enjoys the regular use of the Parramatta River. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Ward. Council, are there any questions of Mr Ward? Councillor McLaughlin.
Yes, I've got one. Matthew, This has come up before, has it? There's been a development application before.
Not as far as I'm aware. The last extension of the marina was carried out in 2000.
Right.
At that time, a very select few members of the immediate vicinity were informed, and many of the residents in the street that the marina is located in were not even aware that the DA existed. And many of those residents became aware of it when it started to be built.
Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? Thank you, Mr. Ward.
Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move the recommendation with the addition of a fourth. The council resolve that in principle opposes any further alienation of community access and use. Opposes any further alienation of community access and use of our waterways and the risk of pollution of the Parramatta River.
Is this in particular, does this particularly relate to the Gladesville Marina?
Mr. Mayor, it relates to the Gladesville Marina and other locations. I think it's an in-principle decision council needs to put in place that it won't accept that sort of alienation in our waterways.
And by alienation, do you mean a restriction of community access? Is that correct?
Well, yes, by maybe I should put in there future development that alienates the community's access and use. Alienation alienates community access. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Mayor.
you. Thank you. So we've got a mover, we've got a seconder.
I have a question, please, before
Okay.
we get into debate. Just on point one, and through you, Mr. Mayor, to the planning manager. This is a state significant development, is that right?
That's correct. Through you, Mayor.
Okay. And we've requested that they would be formally included in all consultations. What is the likelihood of that not happening? Of them shutting us out of the process?
One would think when it gets to that process that as an adjoining block government area attached to waterface, one would assume we would be notified.
But we really want to be notified. We have the
Well,
chance to.
and one of the recommendations that we write to them and flag it with them with regard to that.
And you'll let us know if we get a rejection of it.
Most definitely.
Very good. Councillor Williams, would you like to speak to this?
Briefly, Mr. Mayor, I'm mindful of the time. The report explains what the risks are and the problems with such a development. But I'd like to add there that at the moment, not only in the Parramatta River, but around the waters, Lanco River of Hunters Hill, it is reaching saturation point in terms of vessels being moored permanently, and it is now, or has for quite a while, impeded the recreational use of our waterways. There are only now narrow channels for which vessels can traverse. So, particularly with this location, we have an iconic bridge, a bridge that is now listed, and to have that obscured and crowded by development, which a marina is a development, I think is inappropriate and wrong. And from a Hunters Hill perspective, it will add to loss of amenity through visual pollution. We've also got a group and an agreement through the Parramatta River Catchment Group to enhance the river water quality. This will run the risk of adding significant pollution to the river through either accidents or just through the general daily use of a large number of large vessels. So I think Council has an obligation to have a say on this issue, and I commend the motion to Council.
Thank you. Is wishing to speak against?
I just want to have an indulgence, if I may.
Is anybody wishing to speak against? Do you have a question, Councillor?
I do, and I forgot to ask a question of the Speaker, and I'm just wondering if,
Please do.
with your indulgence, I could ask another question of the Speaker. And it's just really for the public record. There is a community group being formed?
That's correct.
Against
So
this?
our community group is called Save the Gladesville Bridge Waterway. We have incorporated also.
Great, thank you. And people can get in contact with you?
Yep, we've set up a website and we've already got 30 members locally. We've had a number of meetings in the last 3 or 4 weeks, and community support in and around Drummoyne has been excellent. And we note that Huntley's Point, in terms of Hunters Hill municipality being advised, we do recognise that Huntley's Point residents were consulted as part of the process, but we, like you stated, think it's important that Hunters Hill Council be involved in understanding exactly what is proposed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, could you give us the website again, please?
SaveGladesvilleBridgeWaterway.com.
Wasn't taken already.
No.
And I guess whatever we decide to do, you'll let your group know of that.
We will, thank you. I will.
Anybody wishing to speak for the motion? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to support the comments of our Speaker and also Councillor Williams. I've also taken indulgence as a teenager. One of my great pleasures was being to Windward up the shore of Birchgrove in various classes of boat and ducking into the shore to pick up lifts. A few years back, I sailed with my niece from Drummoyne in a cherub. And I tried to do that, and she said, "You can't do that anymore." Well, I said, "Why not?" And she said, "Oh, sailing boats are no longer permitted within the moorings." And I thought, how ridiculous is that? So moorings and marinas have taken a huge bite out of the recreational areas of our younger sportsmen in particular. And I mean, if I ever have the opportunity, that would be something I'd be absolutely opposed, or I'd absolutely oppose. I think really that restriction on small boats being inside the mooring area is totally wrong. I see this when you're going to create huge marinas that are going to do that for everything. It's just absolutely wrong, and I think that when it comes before us, this is an issue that this council, for its community and for sailors and kayakers and all those people who enjoy the waters, I do not wish them to be in any way alienated from further parts of the Parramatta River. Thank you.
Councillor, I think the rule is a sailing club rule rather than any other sort of rule. It's in the conditions of sale of the yacht clubs. Anybody wishing to speak against?
No.
Question? Councillor Collins.
I just a question of the Director of Development. So on question 4, through you, Mr. Mayor, does that actually have any practical implications? I'm just wary about just bolting on a policy that's loosely aligned with this, and if that would have any impact on your work, because I wonder whether it needs to be considered, or is that just a statement?
Through you, Mayor, it gives direction to Council with regard to when the application comes on board and we're talking to the proposal, Marina, we can say that Council in principle opposes any future development. So that's what the recommendation.
Just for the Gladesville Bridge Marina, or everywhere?
What it says about the Parramatta River. risk on the pollution of Parramatta River. So that's what the recommendation, the resolution is, or proposed.
Okay. So
Maybe you can speak to the proponent. Maybe you can speak to.
Are we implementing a policy completely separate from the Baysville Bridge? Because I'd like a little bit more detail about what the implications.
So the question of the mover is this a generalised thing that covers everything, or is it particularly related to the Gladesville Bridge Marina?
It relates to Parramatta River and incorporates the Gladesville Bridge.
Does that answer your query?
Look, it does. Look, I'd like to foreshadow. Look, I'd just like to ask that last. I think everybody wants the same thing on this. I'm just not comfortable bolting on 4, which is maybe a very valid point, but it's not for this motion. I think we need to separate that, perhaps a discussion for another day. So I might ask if Councillor Williams would be willing to remove it from the motion and bring it back at another council meeting, or?
No, Mr. Mayor. I think it's integral to the council's.
Well, I'd like to foreshadow a motion that we adopt this motion as it was prepared for us, and not just implement policy on the fly that's broadly, loosely aligned with what we have in front of us, and we have no report on the implications of it.
Right, thank you. Anybody wishing to speak for? Against? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ward. Thank you. Takes us back to item 4.1, Hunters Hill Council's successful prosecution breach of the food standards for Victoria Kebabs. Moved Councillor McLaughlin, seconded Councillor Williams. Councillor McLaughlin.
I thank Council for pursuing these items on our behalf and on our community's behalf, and another successful prosecution, so thank you very much.
Anybody wishing to speak against? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. Well done. General Manager just made a comment to, I think it's worth saying, is we do take food safety very seriously, and I know that there have been other instances of us pursuing issues of food safety over the last 5 years and aware of it, so thank you. 4.2, development applications. Councillor Collins, seconded Councillor Williams. Councillor Collins, do you wish to speak?
No, thank you. It's okay.
Anybody wishing to speak against?
Point of clarification, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Williams.
We've got in the first report relating to DA 2018-1085, removal of 2 trees. And to justify the second tree, or tree number 2, it refers to recent excavations in the root zone and root damage. Surely that is done without council approval, that excavation, is it?
Through you, Mayor, I can't make a comment without going through the file. I'm happy to distribute the file and the rest of the detail of the report to all councillors and can advise you accordingly.
I think that's important, Mr. Mayor, because we've got a situation here where a potential illegal excavation, and I don't know, I'll be guided by, but if that's the case, why is council allowing that action to justify the removal of the tree without some redress? So I am concerned that tree 2 has further issues to be considered. I also note that there's no identification of the types of trees to replace these, and I think that needs clarification in future. Where trees are removed, we'd be very clear on what we expect to be in their place. Now, in relation to the determination for DA 2018-1081, point 4, it states towards the end, there is concern that the tree's structure and stability had been compromised by the works. The works were undertaken under complying development. The matter should be referred to the relevant private certifier for review. Why is this not within council's ability to enforce compliance? Like, we've got here an example where council believes or alleges that there's some non-complying activity, and we just aren't in a position to clarify and resolve it. So how does approval go? Well, it's been refused. So, but anyway, I need some clarification in relation to why we're not acting on that breach of compliant development.
Yeah. Basically, the officer, when assessing the application, when we considered the application for a garage, the question was raised, how do these trees leave the subject site? And quite rightly, through the code, you're allowed to take trees out when you're building a construction of a building through the CDC process. So through the CDC process and also through constructing a house or a pool, it's automatic that the trees are taken away. And that's what happened here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Perhaps we can consider that further in the future, come back to that.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm confused because I always thought that in our DA process, you were required to consider the trees and they were treated on their merit. They weren't automatically approved for removal.
Yeah. The confusion here is that is on the subject side there's a CDC and they lodged a DA and they conflicted. So therefore the trees were taken away through the CDC process, and that's why our assessment officer raises that as an issue. We pursued it, and following that pursuit we found through the certified that those trees were able to leave the subject site because that's where the construction of the driveway for the proposed dwelling would be.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so it's the right answer, but unacceptable information.
Well, I'll pursue it at a later stage.
That just brings us back to Councillor Sanderson's motion, I think, doesn't it?
Yes.
All right, any further discussion needed on this? Can I put the motion? Those in favour? Against? That carried. Thank you. I think we go to 8.1, am I correct?
Yep.
Quarterly budget review, and we have May here to see if there are any questions. Councillor Collins? Moved.
I'll move.
Seconded, Councillor Miles? Councillor Collins, do you have any comments?
I do have a question. Just the year-to-date figures, bottom right, the 9 million surplus there for year-to-date. Is that correct? I'm sorry, page 25.
Bottom right hand.
Yeah, actuals, yeah.
Operating result.
The operating result, the actual, yes.
That's correct.
Actual year-to-date.
Yes.
So the projected end-of-year result is 104 surplus. It's currently 9 million.
The actual year-to-date at the moment is 9 million, but the projections to the 30th of June, that what we project it to be 104.
When you say year-to-date, is that from 1st of July?
No, the year-to-date as 1st July to 30th of September, yes. just for the September quarters only.
Alright, okay. Okay.
Okay. So, has moved Councillor Collins, seconded Councillor Miles, actually. So, any further discussion on this? I'll put the recommendation. Those in favour, against, let's carry. Thank you. Uh, 8.2, summary of council investments. Councillor Collins, Councillor Miles. Councillor Collins.
Yeah, I do have a question about this. I know I've asked for a report on this, but I just wanted, if we could have a look at those two deposits deposited on the 29th of October. They're the 5th and 4th from the bottom of page 32.
So, in particular, the query you have?
Yeah, the query is that one's got a term of 84 days and one of 92. And they appear to be lodged on the same day. And one at a rate of 2.37 and one at a rate of 2.4.
Why we differentiate or why we split them up?
Well, why are there two amounts of essentially the same amount of money lodged on the same day for different terms at different rates?
We'll come back with an answer there.
Yes.
We'll come back with an answer on that.
It's
here.
on the 29th of the 10th.
These two here, 29, 10, 18, 29, 10, 18. So 5 and 4 up from the bottom, and you can see they've got different rates, and their days, maturity days are slightly different also.
The term difference is 8 days. So I'm just trying to understand what the...
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll come back to the next one on that. Thank you. Any further discussion? I'll put the motion. I'm sorry, Councillor.
I was going to just say, Councillor Collins has raised in the past that these terms probably should be reviewed. Probably not whilst the current General Manager held her position, but perhaps we could revisit that, how these terms are being, how these funds are being invested,
sure,
and at what rate, and whether or not it's worth putting a larger deposit away for a longer period of time for a higher rate. I think that particularly Councillor Collins has raised that 3 or 4 times actually, and that perhaps he should, and the General Manager should reach out to him.
Well, I think it would be good to come back to a future discussion where we have all the councillors in the room and talk about it, so we understand what the method is, what the process is. Are you happy with that? Thank you.
With the question, is that going to come back?
Come back to all councillors.
No, the question I just asked.
Sorry, through you, Ms. Tamika, if I can help. So, in terms of the question about the term deposits, we'll respond and copy all the councillors.
Okay.
But we'll bring back and have a discussion around the investment policy in line with some of the other projects that we're looking at as well.
That would be great, yeah.
I'll put the motion. As in favour? Against? That's carried. 8.3.
Move the recommendation.
Moved Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Sanderson. Any discussion? All in favour? Against? That's carried. 8.4. Councillor Collins, seconded Councillor Williams. Any discussion required? Councillor Williams? Councillor Collins, start with you.
Yeah, just a couple of queries here. 3.1 on page 44, recognising Hunters Hill Day. I'd just like to understand. I mean, I've made it clear what my view of this, but I'm just wondering why it wasn't brought back in October. It won't be brought back before the end of this year when the consultation's finished.
Requiring a report.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Aim to bring it back by the end of the year, so to the December meeting.
So we will have that next meeting. Fantastic. Okay, great. If I may, with the library working party, I know you're waiting on hiring of through you, Mr. Mayor. When do you see that being formed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm actually meeting with Ryde Council in the next couple of weeks to have an initial discussion, and then I would like to come back to the council through a briefing to discuss some options and looking at other opportunities and how that may come together.
Fantastic, thank you.
I think, who else had a query? Councillor Williams?
Oh, I've got many, so have you got
I just got one.
Finished.
Oh, okay, you go.
You done?
You might cover one of
Yeah.
mine.
I'm sorry, we'll go back to Councillor Collins. Please go ahead.
Our last meeting, we resolved to try and have a public meeting regarding this St Joseph's development. Would that be something that we could put on this list? Having the public meeting?
Did we resolve that?
I believe we asked for a community meeting. Yes.
Can that maybe go on this list of outstanding
So we don't
matters?
miss it.
Yeah, that would be. Yes, on page 45, regarding the notice of submission for Victory Park, the property committee, will we have that by the end of the year?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I prefer to have a briefing with the councillors first to talk about how the different projects that we have could potentially come together, and to seek your thoughts on those and then come back to the council meeting.
Would it be possible to have that briefing at the next meeting? Because, I mean, we just resolved to form this committee quite long before you got here, but it hasn't been formed yet, and I'd like to see it formed.
Noted.
Yeah.
Yep, through you, Mr. Mayor, happy to talk about it at the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they were advertised, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
Okay.
Anything else, Councillor Collins?
I think that is it from me.
Go to Councillor Williams.
No, Councillor McLaughlin.
Sorry, I've just got one.
I've got many. So.
You got many.
I've got many.
It's just on page 43. It relates to the Hunters Hill Art Exhibition Advisory Committee meeting. I was disappointed that the meeting was cancelled at the last minute last week, and I'm just wondering if it says a further report will be prepared for council in November. What's happened to the committee? Where are we at? Because as the chair of the committee, I'm sitting outside the box at the moment. So we need to have at least one art committee meeting before the end of the year, and through you, I'm directing this to the General Manager through you, Mr. Mayor.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as you'd be aware, the Manager Community Services role is vacant at the moment. So we have someone who's acting in that role as well as their substantive role. And we're working through with the resourcing of the art exhibition for next year. The acting manager has sourced some quotes and in the process of assessing those, and I'm happy to brief you on the outcome of that, and we can certainly have a meeting before Christmas.
Can we organise a meeting
before Christmas?
Yes, perhaps with the Deputy Chair and the relevant officers, just before we actually have a art committee meeting, just so we're up to date on where we're at, because there's two issues there that were in motion that we resolved to do, and I'm just a bit out of the loop about where they're at. So maybe if you could send me some times and dates we can meet. Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
While we're on that issue, I agree with Councillor McLaughlin. There's also a critical time factor in the way that the art show is put together, and we need to get a decision on this. So I do support having a meeting sooner rather than later, because the process starts this year, not next year. There needs to be clarity around that. Now, moving back to the first page, the second point relating to flooding at 3 Hillcrest Street. I'm staggered at the time it's taken to get some resolution or some advice back to the residents about this issue. I was raising it the day I got on council, over almost 18 months ago now. It's not dependent on the floodplain risk management advisory committee. That committee doesn't do management plans. What it does is an overall strategic approach. It doesn't get into the nitty-gritty. So I would suggest council needs to get some closure on this issue, and we don't need the floodplain risk management advisory committee to help resolve that. The next issue down the page, I again, as I've stated, and I raised this issue originally, it's fundamental to council's business, and I do appreciate the new general manager needs time, but this has again been on the books for a long, long time, and it's, as I keep saying, fundamental in the way that we deliver our services, fundamental in the way that we get efficiency and outcomes for our community. So I do urge that go fairly quickly.
That's item 3.1, is it? The 1311. It's the 3057. Is that what you're referring to? Maintenance and restoration of infrastructure.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, the next one down from where I was talking before.
Okay.
Moving on to page 40. We've got here, and it relates to an identification relating to Bonifan Road on 7.1, which starts on page 38. Again, we don't seem to have a time path or time critical decision making here. Again, this has been going on since last year, and I know there's been reasonable and productive consultation with the residents affected, but we need to get on with it. Then we can go over the next page, page 42, 1.1, the second last point there. You state in the progress report, first review will be as at the 31st of December 2018. There won't be anybody at council to do it at that stage, so I'm not quite sure about the timing of that. The next one down, again, we talk about the next action being the 23rd of October 2018. We're well past that. Is there a future date related to that? Then there's a series of items here that have no comment about progress. On page 43, the last item, if you go on to, well, Councillor Collins covered the next one. If you go to page 45, 3.1, no comments there as to what's going to be done about it. Yes, well, we've dealt with that one. Buffalo Creek parking, again, that needs a time frame. There doesn't appear to be any decision there. I suspect it needs to be deleted because the time frame is 2020. The next one down from that, 9.4. Yeah, again, when is that going to take place? Improving parking in Margaret Street, there's no progress listed. Page 49, question 13.6. Again, that is a long running issue. So when is that going to, what's the timeline for that? When is that going to be completed? The same for the one at the bottom of the page, proposed changes to Council's Code of Meeting Practice. When are we going to have that workshop? So there's a range of issues there, Mr Mayor, that leave questions in my mind, and I think if we're going to have a table like this...
Yep, thanks for pointing it out again. We'll update that with those dates and ready for discussion next meeting. Thank you. Councillor Sanson.
Yes, Mr Mayor, just a brief one if I could reinforce what Councillor Williams has pointed out about the Prince Edward Street Bladesville It's interesting that that refers to the question without notice relating to the actual motion itself.
Okay.
The motion itself is far more detailed, and I think it's interesting to compare the motion with the actual progress.
So that's, yeah.
Top item on page 49.
Thank you. So, do you want to move in a second? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. 9.1, I think we're up to now. Councillor briefings. Moved Councillor Collins, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Collins?
No. Yeah.
Councillor Williams?
Stephen, no. What's that, Mr. Chairman?
Did you wish to comment on this?
I'll have my name recorded in opposition, because I don't think it adequately covers nor informs the community of the process.
Anybody else wishing to comment? Put the motion. Those in favour? Against? That's carried. 9.2, I think, is next. The designated friendship. Moved Councillor Collins, seconded Councillor Miles. All in favour? Against? That's carried. Is there any further business? Are there any questions without notice? Nothing further to discuss tonight, councillors. Close the meeting at 10:06. Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much, Councillor.